I'll give you $1,000 if you serve me in English. I'll give you $1,000 if you serve me in English, the millionaire taunted as the entire table burst into laughter. The glasses vibrated, wine splashed, and the restaurant became a stage for humiliation. Across from him, a young waitress watched him in silence. Her hands trembled slightly, but in her gaze was something impossible to explain. Dignity. The millionaire raised his glass arrogantly. "Come on, give it a try," he repeated between laughs. "I'll give you $1,000 if you serve me in English." The entire room held its breath. She took a deep breath, and when she looked up, no one was laughing anymore. The Luna de Polanco restaurant was brimming with light and elegant murmurs that night. The chandeliers reflected in the glasses, laughter floated through the aisles, and the scent of expensive wine mixed with rosemary-seasoned meat. In the center of the room, a table of executives drew all eyes. 4 dark suits, shiny watches and a man with a smile that was too confident. Erich von Bauer spoke loudly with that tone that doesn't seek conversation, but spectacle. "You know what I love about Mexico," he said to his group. "That you can get the best service in the world for so little." The laughter spread like sparks. A few steps away, Valeria Torres, with her hair pulled back and her tray steady, waited for the chuckles to die down. "Good evening. Would you like to order now?" she asked calmly. "Of course, sweetheart," Erich replied without looking at her. "But first, how much of what I'm saying do you actually understand?" She didn't answer, just poised her pen over her notepad. A restrained, professional smile appeared on her face. "See," he added, looking at his friends. "I talk to you and you barely understand me. That's why you'll never get far in this country." Camila, the manager, watched from the bar. She wanted to step in, but fear of the von Bauer name stopped her. She knew that man invested millions in the group's hotels and that a complaint from him could cost anyone their job. Valeria took a deep breath. She remembered her brother Mateo's voice that morning. "You taught me my first words in English, remember? You're the best teacher in the world." Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from rage. "Contained. Would you like red or white wine?" she asked softly. Erich looked her up and down, amused by her calm. "Whatever you can pronounce," he said, laughing loudly. The laughter of his companions filled the space. One of them looked down, uncomfortable, but said nothing. The silence that followed was thick, almost cruel. Valeria kept her posture. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of backing down. Erich lifted his glass, enjoying the power he thought he had. "Although, come to think of it," he murmured, leaning toward her, making sure everyone heard, "we could make this more interesting." She looked at him without blinking. "More interesting, sir?" He smiled, savoring each word. "Yes. A bet." He set the glass down on the table with a sharp tap and announced in a loud, challenging voice, "I'll give you $1,000 if you serve me in English." The laughter erupted once more. Valeria didn't move, she just slowly lowered her tray as the candlelight reflected in her eyes. The air in the room grew dense, even the violin music seemed to stop. Camila pressed her lips together, fearing the worst. Erich waited for a reaction, any reaction. But Valeria, in silence, simply took one step forward, looked him straight in the eye, and took a deep breath. And then, with a calm that chilled everyone, she said in a threat of a voice, "Very well, sir. If that's what you want. If this story has moved you this far, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and leave your like to keep following along." The murmur in the restaurant had changed. It was no longer cheerful or relaxed. It was an expectant, tense, uncomfortable silence. The glasses remained motionless on the table, and the candles, with their flickering light, seemed to reflect everyone's discomfort. Erich von Bauer kept his smug smile. He played with his wine glass as if time belonged to him. "Come on, girl," he said in a mocking tone. "Don't take so long to think, or do you need me to translate for you?" Valeria Torres didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on him, contained but intense. Each passing second increased the tension. She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her, customers, waitstaff, even the pianist who had stopped playing. Camila, from the bar, gave her an almost pleading signal with her head. "Let it go, okay? Please?" But Valeria wasn't willing to. Not after so many humiliations disguised under polite smiles. She inhaled slowly. "The gentleman wishes to be served in English," she repeated without changing her tone. "Very well." Eric raised an amused eyebrow. "Are you really going to try?" He laughed. "This should be interesting." One of his associates, the youngest, tried to intervene. "Eric, that's enough. Let her work." But the millionaire cut him off with a gesture. "No, no, I want to see this." Valeria set the tray down on the service table. Her breathing was so slow it was barely noticeable. Her brother Mateo's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't let anyone make you feel less for knowing things they don't." When she looked up, her expression had changed. There was no longer fear in her eyes, but a dangerous calm. "So," Eric said, leaning back in his chair, "what are you going to say to me, miss?" Valeria took a step forward. Her voice sounded clear, with perfect diction that cut through the air of the room. "Would you like to start with the wine list, or should I start teaching you some manners first?" The silence was absolute. The laughter died out like a candle in the rain. The associates looked at each other, confused. Camila's eyes widened in disbelief. Eric, for the first time, didn't know what to say. The waitress, the one he had believed ignorant, had just spoken to him in English cleaner and more natural than his own. Valeria held his gaze serenely without moving. He tried to laugh, but his voice trembled. You speak English?" She smiled faintly, without arrogance. "Let's just say I understand enough to know when someone is trying to make fun of me." The murmur returned, but it was different. No longer laughter, but whispers, hushed comments, a mix of shame and admiration. Eric looked down at his glass, spinning it between his fingers as if seeking an answer in the wine's reflection. Valeria turned halfway, tray in hand, and walked away slowly. The echo of her footsteps was the only sound in the entire room. And behind her, Eric von Bauer felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, shame. A sensation that, without him knowing it, would be the beginning of his downfall. The silence at Luna de Polanco became so thick the very air seemed to stop. For a moment, no one moved. Eyes went from Eric to Valeria, from Valeria to the empty glass, trying to understand what had just happened. Eric von Bauer still wore a frozen smile, but the mocking glint in his eyes was gone. He cleared his throat, pretending it was all a joke. "Well," he murmured, trying to laugh. "Seems someone took classes on YouTube." Some laughed nervously, more out of habit than amusement, but the sound died immediately because Valeria Torres didn't lower her head or take a step back. She just watched him with that disarming calm, with that firmness that needed no words. "Excuse me, sir," she said in Spanish. "If the show is over, I can bring you the wine list." Her tone was impeccable, polite, but every syllable carried an edge. Camila finally approached with measured steps, trying to soften the mood. "Mr. von Bauer, allow me to offer you a bottle on the house, courtesy of the restaurant," she said with a tense smile. "To make up for the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Valeria repeated without looking at her. Her words hung in the air like knives wrapped in velvet. Eric took a sip of wine and pointed at her with the glass. "You've got spirit, miss. But be careful not to get too clever. Pride doesn't pay the bills." She held his gaze without fear. "And money doesn't buy manners, sir." The phrase was a sharp blow. A couple of customers at other tables held their breath. Camila took her arm discreetly, whispering, "Please, Val, don't get into trouble." Valeria nodded, but without looking away from Eric. Something was awakening in her, something that wasn't about anger, but about the dignity that had been denied her too many times. As she walked away, Eric's voice sounded again, but this time lower, almost unsure. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" She stopped for just an instant. "In places where people don't need to humiliate others to feel superior." And she kept walking. Behind her, Eric felt a strange emptiness in his chest. It wasn't rage, it was something else. A sensation that made him more uncomfortable than shame, the reflection of himself in that woman. Camila caught up with her at the bar. "Val, you're crazy. That man could get you fired today." Valeria set the tray down, took a deep breath, and said with a serenity that was disarming, "If I get fired for telling the truth, then so be it. There are things that hurt more than losing a job." Camila looked at her in silence. For a moment, she felt envy of that peace, of that strength she herself had forgotten she possessed. A few meters away, Eric watched without understanding. That woman he had wanted to ridicule had exposed him in front of everyone. For the first time, the millionaire didn't know how to regain his power. And as Valeria returned to attend another table, the sound of the violin returned to the room, but this time it sounded different, less elegant, more human. As if the entire restaurant had changed with a single sentence. And Eric, with his gaze lost in his glass, knew that night wasn't over for him. It had only just begun. The night continued, but the atmosphere never returned to normal. The conversations that once filled the restaurant died down little by little, as if everyone were afraid of breaking the new silence floating in the air. Even the pianist seemed to play more carefully, choosing notes that wouldn't bother anyone. Valeria Torres kept working, moving between tables with the precision of someone who has learned to disguise what they feel. Her face was serene, but inside her heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from the release that comes from a battle won with dignity. Camila watched her from afar, still unable to believe what had happened. "I don't know how you can stand there as if nothing happened," she whispered when they crossed paths at the bar. "That man could ruin you with one phone call." Valeria filled a glass of water and replied softly, "Maybe. But he can't take my peace. I've already learned that." On the other side of the room, Eric von Bauer remained seated. His associates had left, uncomfortable from the scene, but he stayed there alone, watching the reflection in the wine. He didn't understand why he kept thinking about that woman. It wasn't just wounded pride, it was something deeper, something that made him feel uncomfortable with himself. The echo of her voice pronouncing that perfect English wouldn't leave him. He ordered another bottle, more to keep busy than for enjoyment. When Valeria returned to his table, he looked at her with an attempt at courtesy that didn't come naturally. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said quietly. "Sometimes one says things without thinking." She looked up expressionlessly. "Sometimes one says exactly what one thinks, sir," she replied calmly. He smiled tensely. "You're right." He paused, searching for words. "Where did you learn English?" "At university." Her voice was brief, neutral. "Before working here, I studied English literature." Eric nodded slowly. "I wouldn't have guessed." "No one does," she countered. "I don't usually talk about it." For the first time, there was a silence between them that wasn't hostile, just a dense, strange air, of two worlds that shouldn't meet but now shared the same table. A group of new customers entered the restaurant, breaking the tension. Valeria took the chance to withdraw discreetly. Eric followed her with his gaze, feeling a pang he couldn't name. Camila approached him a moment later with the prudence of someone who knows the powerful all too well. "Mr. von Bauer, thank you for your understanding. The house offers you dessert on us." He nodded distractedly but didn't touch a bite. His thoughts were elsewhere, or rather, on another person. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Valeria washed her hands under the cold water, letting the silence envelop her. She knew that night wouldn't go unnoticed, that people would talk, that there might be consequences. But she also knew something else. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. And as she closed her eyes for a moment to calm her breathing, she didn't see that from a distance, Eric was watching her leave the restaurant with the uncomfortable certainty that this story wasn't over yet. The next morning, the sun bathed the streets of Polanco in golden light. The bustle of cars and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Valeria Torres walked toward the restaurant with a calm step, as if nothing had happened the night before. But inside her, something had changed. On the way, she bought a sweet roll for her brother Mateo, who was waiting for her at home before school. The boy smiled as he listened to her tell stories about languages and faraway countries. "Do you know what thank you means, Mateo?" she asked. "Gracias," he replied proudly. "That's right," she said, ruffling his hair. "Never forget that words can build or destroy." When she arrived at Luna de Polanco, the rumors were already flying. The waitstaff whispered among themselves with a mix of admiration and fear. "They say she left him speechless," one whispered. "And that she spoke English better than him," added another. Camila greeted her with a nervous look. "Val." They called from administration. "They say Mr. von Bauer asked to speak with you if you came back." Valeria raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Come back after what happened?" "I don't know. But his chauffeur called an hour ago." The day passed slowly with that tension you feel when something is about to happen. The clock struck 2 p.m. when a black car stopped in front of the restaurant. Eric von Bauer got out, dark suit, sunglasses, a contained expression. He entered without looking at anyone and asked for a table in the corner, away from curious eyes. The employees exchanged alarmed glances. Camila approached cautiously. "Would you like me to assign you another server, sir?" "No. I want her to serve me." His voice was firm, leaving no room for discussion. Valeria watched him from a distance. Her instinct told her to avoid that table, but something inside her, a mix of pride and serenity, pushed her to walk toward him. "Good afternoon, Mr. von Bauer," she said with the same professional tone as always. "What would you like to order today?" He looked up. "Just a black coffee, no sugar." He paused a second before adding, "And a conversation, if you don't mind." She held the tray between her hands. "That depends on the topic." Eric offered a brief smile. "About yesterday. About how you managed to turn the entire restaurant against me in 5 seconds." Valeria looked at him calmly. "I didn't do anything, sir. I only spoke your language. You were the one who decided how to use it." He lowered his gaze. "I suppose I deserved that." He took a breath. "I don't usually apologize, but last night I saw myself reflected in something I didn't like." His words took Valeria by surprise. For a moment, she thought she saw sincerity in his eyes, but she didn't respond. The silence lengthened. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee floated between them. Eric took it with both hands as if seeking courage in the heat of the cup. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" he finally asked. Valeria smiled faintly. "No one is just anything, sir. We all have a story. It's just that some people prefer not to listen to it." He nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. His usual arrogance seemed to crumble little by little. He watched her walk toward the bar, and for the first time, he felt something he'd never felt in his life of power and money, respect, but also an inexplicable need to understand her. And as he watched her attend another table, he didn't imagine that this curiosity would soon lead him to discover something that would change his way of seeing the world. In the following days, Eric von Bauer returned to the restaurant 3 times. Never with the same group of executives, never with laughter. Now he came alone, ordered the same thing, a black coffee, and remained in silence, watching from his usual table. Valeria Torres at first pretended not to notice, but every time she passed nearby, she felt his gaze. It wasn't a gaze of power or judgment, it was something else, a mix of respect, interest, and something she preferred not to name. Camila watched her uneasily. "Val, this is starting to worry me. That man doesn't take a step without calculating it. What does he want with you?" "I don't know," Valeria replied. But as long as he doesn't disrespect me, I don't care. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his office, Eric called his assistant. Get me information on an employee at Luna de Polanco. Her name is Valeria Torres. Reason? Asked the assistant. Personal, he replied curtly. Hours later, the information arrived in his email. Asterisk former student at UNAM, degree in English literature. Scholarship cancelled due to family reasons. Mother deceased 3 years ago. Sole guardian of an 11-year-old minor asterisk. Eric read the report several times, pausing at each word. He didn't understand why reading that affected him so much, perhaps because he had never stopped to think about the story behind the people who served his table. That night, he returned to the restaurant. Valeria saw him enter and sighed silently. She approached with her notepad, keeping the usual distance. The usual coffee, sir? Yes. But this time I'd like to ask for something else. She looked up warily. I'm listening. I learned yesterday that you studied English literature, he said bluntly. That you left university to take care of your family. The pen fell from her hand. What? Her voice dropped a tone. Who gave you that information? It wasn't my intention to invade your privacy, he tried to explain. I just wanted to understand. Valeria clenched her jaw. You had no right. He nodded, accepting the blame. I know. But I need to tell you something. She waited in silence. Last night, I thought about what you said, that there are languages that shouldn't be used to humiliate. Eric lowered his gaze. You were right. And I can't stop thinking about how many times I've done it without realizing. Valeria watched him, not knowing whether to believe him. There was something different in his voice, a sincerity she hadn't heard before. But even so, the pain of that humiliation was still fresh. Don't try to clear your conscience with me, sir, she replied firmly. I don't need your remorse. I'm not looking for that, he interrupted softly. I just want to listen to you. To know who you really are. For the first time, she looked at him for a long moment, as if searching his eyes for a hidden intention. But what she saw disarmed her. There was no arrogance or irony. Just a man beginning to understand that money didn't make him more worthy. There's not much to tell, she said finally. Life taught me English, but it also taught me to stay silent. Eric smiled sadly. And yet, your words are worth more than everything I've said in years. She took a step back, uncomfortable with the emotion she felt hearing him. She turned to attend another table, but her breathing trembled slightly. Meanwhile, at the table, Eric opened the check holder, left the exact amount, and underneath it, a small folded piece of paper with a handwritten phrase, "Not all languages are spoken with words." Valeria found it minutes later, and for the first time, she felt that that man, the same one who had humiliated her, was beginning to learn how to listen. The following days brought a different air to Luna de Polanco. The employees noticed the new calm in the atmosphere, though no one dared comment on it. Eric von Bauer kept visiting the restaurant, but no longer as the man in charge, rather as someone learning to observe. And Valeria Torres, despite trying to keep her distance, was beginning to discover that this client's silence felt less heavy than before. That afternoon, the sky over Mexico City turned gray. Rain beat against the windows, filling the place with a soft sound that mixed nostalgia and peace. Eric drank his coffee while Valeria served another table. From time to time, their eyes met briefly, almost shyly, as if both feared breaking something that had just begun to be built. Camila approached discreetly. Val, do you realize he comes just to see you? She whispered, smiling. Valeria looked at her calmly. Don't say that, Cammy. It's not like that. Then why does your hand tremble every time he walks by? Valeria looked down. She didn't want to admit that deep down, something in her had changed. It wasn't attraction, at least not yet. It was something harder to explain, the feeling that for the first time, someone was looking at her without underestimating her. That afternoon, the restaurant received an unexpected visit, Lucia Trevino, the owner. An elegant woman with a firm voice, accustomed to maintaining control. Her presence alone made everyone straighten their posture. Camila said in a low tone, "She needs to speak with you in private." Minutes later, in the back office, the conversation was tense. "Comments have reached me about an incident with Mr. Von Bauer," Lucia began, "and now they tell me he comes every day to see you." Camila swallowed. "There's nothing inappropriate, ma'am. Just a misunderstood situation that's been resolved." "I hope so," replied the owner. "We can't allow the restaurant's image to be compromised." That same night, Valeria was called to the office. Lucia greeted her with a polite smile. "Miss Torres, you are an excellent employee, but I need to remind you of something. Here, we serve. We don't form relationships with customers." Valeria remained upright. "There is no relationship, ma'am. Only courtesy." "I hope so," Lucia replied, though courtesy can sometimes be confused with interest. When Valeria left the office, her heart felt heavy. Camila was waiting outside. "Did she scold you?" she asked. "No. Worse. She spoke to me with kindness." That night, as she was putting her things away, she felt someone approach. It was Eric, standing by the door. "I heard they called you in," he said seriously. "You had problems because of me." "Nothing I can't handle," she replied without looking at him. "I'm used to being judged by what others think." Eric took a deep breath. "I don't want to be one of those others." "Then don't be. But don't try to save me either." "I don't need saviors, Mr. Von Bauer." Her tone wasn't hostile, just honest. Eric nodded, accepting the boundary. "I understand. But even so, if one day you decide to tell me your story, I promise to listen to all of it without interrupting." Valeria looked at him for a moment, and something in her gaze changed. It wasn't distrust, it was that mix of surprise and tenderness that appears when someone begins to lower their own defenses. The rain kept falling outside, washing the streets and the reflections of the lights. And between the sound of the water and the shared silences, both felt something neither dared to name. That night, as Valeria closed the restaurant, she thought about her mother, about Matteo, about everything she had lost. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. What she didn't know was that the next day, someone else would burst into her routine and test everything that was beginning to heal. Dawn brought a different air. The local papers talked about a new hotel investment in Mexico City, and Eric Von Bauer's name was on every front page. His image, the perfect businessman, the man of success, shone once more. But behind that magazine smile, something had changed. His mind remained trapped in that restaurant, in the voice of a woman who had faced him with dignity. That same morning, Valeria Torres arrived early at Luna de Polanco. The atmosphere was tense. Some employees looked at her with curiosity, others with pity. Camila intercepted her before she entered the kitchen. "Val, we have a problem." "What happened?" she asked worriedly. "A journalist was outside a while ago. They say he's looking for information about you and Mr. Von Bauer." Valeria froze. "About me? Why?" Camila lowered her voice. "It seems someone saw Eric leaving here with you the other night. They're insinuating things." Valeria felt a knot in her stomach. "That's not true." "I know. But people don't need the truth, just rumors." At noon, Lucia Trevino, the owner, arrived furious. "Valeria." Her voice echoed through the restaurant. "To my office. Now." The tone was enough for everyone to lower their heads. Inside, Lucia threw a cell phone on the desk. On the screen was a photo, Valeria and Eric talking at the door in the rain. At first glance, it looked like an intimate scene. "Can you explain this to me?" asked the owner. "We were talking. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" "People don't see it that way." Do you know what it implies to have the owner of half the city linked with a waitress? Valeria took a deep breath. I have no control over what others invent, ma'am. Lucia looked at her for a moment, crossing her arms. I'm afraid you do have control over your continued employment here. Are you telling me I'm fired? I'm telling you I need to protect the restaurant's reputation, even if that means ruining yours. The owner didn't respond. The silence was enough. Valeria left with eyes full of contained tears. Camila hugged her without a word, but before she could leave, a firm voice was heard from the entrance. She's not going anywhere. Everyone turned. Eric von Bauer was standing there with a serious face, without the usual arrogant glint. Lucia looked at him, surprised. Mr. von Bauer, I wasn't expecting your visit. I see. But I came just in time. His gaze stopped on Valeria. Any problem with her is my business. Lucia tensed. Sir, with all due respect, this restaurant cannot. This restaurant, he interrupted, placing his hands on the desk, has belonged to my investment group for 2 weeks. So yes, it can. The silence was immediate. Camila covered her mouth in disbelief. Lucia lowered her gaze. I didn't know you had acquired a stake, Mr. von Bauer. Now you know. And you also know that no one is going to touch Miss Torres. Valeria was paralyzed. She didn't understand if this was a defense or a new humiliation. I didn't need you to protect me, sir, she said in a trembling voice. He looked at her with contained tenderness. I know. But I couldn't stay silent while others did what I once did. For an instant, everything hung suspended. Lucia nodded silently and withdrew, defeated. Camila took Valeria's hand, emotional. And Eric, without another word, turned and left under the drizzle that was beginning to fall. Valeria watched him from the door. Between the raindrops, she saw him stop and look up at the sky as if seeking forgiveness in the rain. That was the first time she understood that the man who had humiliated her was truly beginning to change. The rain didn't stop all afternoon. The gray sky covered the city, and traffic crawled slowly along the avenues of Polanco. Valeria Torres walked under her umbrella with her mind in a whirlwind. Eric's words echoed in her head. I couldn't stay silent while others did what I once did. She didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, anger, confusion. For the first time in years, someone had defended her, but that someone was the same man who had caused her pain. When she got home, Mateo ran to hug her. Val, I got an A in English today, he said excitedly, showing her his notebook. She smiled, stroking his hair. I knew you could do it. My teacher said I pronounce like you. Valeria laughed, and for a moment, the weariness disappeared. But looking out the window, she saw a car parked in front of the building. It was black, discreet, with a chauffeur who didn't take his eyes off the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She opened the window slightly. The chauffeur got out and handed an envelope to the doorman, who then brought it up to her apartment. This is for you, Miss Torres. A gentleman left it, the woman said. Valeria hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. I know you don't trust me, and I understand that. But there's something I need to tell you, and I'd rather you hear it from me before you hear it from others. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., there will be a scholarship presentation at the Von Bauer Foundation. Your name is on the list. Just come if you wish. E. Valeria fell silent. Her heart pounded forcefully. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or invaded. Part of her wanted to tear up the letter. Another couldn't stop looking at it. The next morning, she showed up for work. Camila greeted her with a mix of excitement and dread. You read the letter, right? She whispered. They say it's a scholarship. I'm not going, Valeria replied. Why not? Because I don't need charity. But at 5 p.m., when the sky began to clear after the storm, her steps unintentionally led her to the foundation building. She didn't know why she was there, maybe out of curiosity, maybe intuition. The hall was spacious, with stained glass and white flowers. Eric was on stage accompanied by press representatives. His voice sounded different, calm, human. This scholarship, he was saying, isn't for those born with opportunities, but for those who create them with effort. People who, even when life closes doors, keep learning, keep teaching. Valeria listened from the back, her gaze fixed on him. Eric held up a golden envelope. The first recipient of this program is someone who reminded me of the true meaning of respect, someone who, without knowing it, gave me the most important lesson of my life. Please welcome Valeria Torres. The audience applauded. She didn't move. Her legs trembled, her heart in her throat. Camila, who had accompanied her, gently pushed her. Go, Val. It's your moment. She walked up to the stage amid applause and lights. Eric extended the envelope to her with trembling hands. She took it, but her eyes couldn't look at him. I didn't do anything to deserve this, she said quietly. Yes, you did, he replied. You taught me the value of what can't be bought. The people applauded again, not understanding the story behind those words. But they understood. It was the story of a wound that had begun as humiliation and was now transforming into forgiveness. Valeria stepped down from the stage with the envelope in her hand, not knowing whether to give thanks or cry. And when she turned to look at him one last time, she saw something in Eric's eyes that completely disarmed her: truth. The echo of the applause still resonated when Valeria Torres left the foundation building. The cool evening air caressed her face, and for the first time in a long time, she breathed without fear. The envelope with the scholarship rested in her hands, but the real weight she felt wasn't made of paper, it was a decision. Eric von Bauer caught up with her on the sidewalk. He had no bodyguards, no suit, none of the arrogance that usually accompanied him. Just a tired man, but different. Valeria, he said calmly. I didn't expect you to come. Neither did I, she smiled slightly. But sometimes one needs to see if people change or just say they do. He held her gaze without looking away. I'm trying to change. Not out of guilt, but because I no longer want to live empty. She looked down. Change isn't talked about, it's demonstrated. Then let me demonstrate it, he replied sincerely. I'm not asking for anything. Just that you keep studying, that you keep inspiring others as you inspired me. Valeria remained silent. Inside her, something was finding peace. It wasn't immediate forgiveness, but understanding. The certainty that the man who had humiliated her had learned the lesson life had denied him, the lesson of respect. Thank you, Mr. von Bauer, she finally said. Please, he replied with a soft smile. Just Eric. She nodded with a new serenity. Then thank you, Eric. And good luck with your new way of speaking. He laughed faintly. I hope to do it as well as you someday. Both remained there under a sky that was beginning to shine again. There was no hug, no promise, no debt. Just two people who, after hurting each other, were learning to walk in different directions with the same lesson: dignity isn't begged for. It's demonstrated. That night, returning home, Matteo waited for her with a cup of hot chocolate and a smile. So, are you going back to school? He asked. Yes, love. But this time I'll do it for us. The boy hugged her tightly. And as the city lights reflected in the window, Valeria knew that all the pain she had endured had had meaning. Because although life had put her face to face with contempt, her response had been the most powerful of all, that of a heart that doesn't give up. And somewhere in the city, Eric, looking out from his empty office, whispered silently a phrase only she would have understood: respect. Dignity. Hope. And so their destinies separated, but the lesson remained forever. Sometimes life doesn't punish with shouts, but with mirrors. Eric von Bauer understood it too late when he saw in that waitress's eyes the reflection of everything he had lost by believing himself superior. It wasn't just a lesson about languages, it was a lesson about humanity. Valeria Torres didn't seek revenge, applause, or recognition. She only wanted respect, and she achieved it not by raising her voice, but by showing that dignity isn't negotiated, it's upheld. He learned that power without humility is just noise. She understood that silence can also be a form of strength. And although they followed different paths, both were marked by the same truth, that sometimes the person who arrives to humiliate you ends up being the one who teaches you to look yourself in the eye. Perhaps destiny crossed their paths only for that, to remind us that a word can wound, but it can also heal, that respect costs nothing and yet is worth more than $1,000. If this story touched your heart and you want to help us keep telling stories like this, tap the thanks or super thanks button, the heart with the $sign you see below the video. Every time you do, you help us keep creating stories that inspire and defend people's dignity. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of this story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next stories. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And before you go, check out the story I've left for you here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.